The new iPad Pro is here with an all-new OLED display for your content, a leap forward in performance with the M4 chip, and some new features and changes to the Magic Keyboard and Apple Pencil. A culmination of upgrades making this the absolute peak iPad Pro. I've switched to this from the M2, but is it worth the upgrade? This is my review. What's up guys, my name is Jack, I'm at Tech Videos. Once again, I went for the larger model. This is now a 13-inch, and I just prefer having the extra screen space, especially for multitasking when using multiple apps at the same time. This is the new Space Black finish, and it's a lot darker than the previous Space Grey, and it looks really nice the way that it shifts and changes in the light. There's a few design changes. The rear camera now has a new look with a unibody aluminium design. No more ultra-wide camera, interestingly, I'm guessing because no one was using it, but we do still have the wide for scanning documents with an improved True Tone flash to remove shadows. Scanning looks really clean now. And also the front camera along with Face ID have moved from the portrait side to landscape where it should be. No more awkward side angles in FaceTime. But if there's one thing that you've heard about this new iPad Pro, it's really thin. It's thinner than my iPhone, thinner than an actual pencil, and even thinner than the 7th gen iPad Nano, making the 13-inch iPad Pro the thinnest device that Apple has ever made. Here it is next to the M2 iPad Pro as well for some comparison. It's kind of hard to believe when you actually get this thing in your hands. It just feels like this magical piece of glass that can turn into any application right at your fingertips. But naturally, there have been some concerns about what that means for durability. Are we going to have a Bendgate 2.0 situation? Now, I'm not going to try and bend this thing, but others have, and it doesn't seem to be any less structurally sound than the last version. In fact, in some instances, it's even stronger. And it certainly doesn't feel weak or flimsy in the hands at all, so it's not something that I'm even worried about. And also concerns about battery life, as this does have a slightly smaller battery than before, but with the new efficiency of the new chip, we still get the same 10-hour battery life, which lines up with what I've been seeing in my use so far. But why make this even thinner? That's the question that I've seen pop up quite a lot since this was first announced. Why is Apple obsessed with thinness? Well, I think it's less about the size and more about the weight. It's about 100 grams lighter than before, which I can feel, but it doesn't feel like substantially different. If you are carrying this in your backpack with books or camera gear, then yeah, it's not going to make that much difference. But it is going to make a difference for the Magic Keyboard, which we'll come back to in a moment. Let's talk about this new display, as it is the biggest thing here on the iPad. It's the canvas that displays all of your apps and content. Both the 11 and 13-inch Pro now use OLED, meaning we get those perfect blacks with rich contrast and vibrant colours, without the blooming and glowing effects that you would sometimes see on the 12.9-inch mini LED before. It really is just an incredible display to see in person. HDR content looks absolutely stunning. I already watch a lot of content on my iPad because I can, take it with me around the house, and now it just looks better than ever. If you buy this iPad Pro, then it's probably going to have the best screen on any device that you own. It certainly is for me. We still have the 120Hz high refresh rate, so animations and moving around the OS looks and feels buttery smooth. And there's some pretty cool tech inside here making all of this happen. One of the drawbacks of OLED is that as the screen size gets bigger, the maximum brightness decreases. So to solve that, Apple is using a tandem OLED setup, which simply put is two OLED panels stacked on top of each other to bump up that brightness. And this display gets noticeably brighter than the M2. We've gone from 600 to 1000 nits for SDR content and still up to 1600 nits for peak HDR. If you use your iPad outside a lot, you'll really appreciate that extra brightness. It's a lot more readable. We also get a new display option for the first time. For an extra $100, you can now get a matte nano texture version, which reduces reflections by scattering and diffusing the light across the display. But honestly, most people aren't going to need this unless you are someone who works in like a really bright environment outdoors or somewhere with a lot of spotlights. Seeing it in person in the store, unless you are looking like straight at it, it just kind of looks washed out as it disperses the light, making blacks look grey, kind of taking away from all of the goodness of the OLED. Plus, it is only available on the top two capacities, the 1 and 2 terabytes, so you'll have to fork out quite a bit just to get it. For me, the standard display is just fine. It handles reflections pretty well, and I think that most people are going to be more than happy with it. On the performance side, Apple kind of surprised us all and stuck the first M4 chip in the iPad Pro, leapfrogging the Mac, which not that long ago only just got the M3. But if there's one thing that the iPad Pro has not been short of in recent years, it's processing power. And yet compared to the M2, the M4 gives us up to 50% faster CPU performance and up to 4 times faster graphics. Now, in everyday use, it doesn't really mean much because the iPad Pro was already just so ridiculously powerful. I haven't really noticed a performance jump. Opening apps is like, yeah, a little bit faster, but I wouldn't really be able to tell without seeing them side by side. The bigger differences start to appear under heavy workloads. If you're exporting videos or batch editing a bunch of big raw files, the M2 took 5 minutes 50 to export a pretty basic 10-minute 4K project from Final Cut Pro, with the M4 taking just over 5 minutes. Not a huge difference, but that can add up with bigger projects. The new chip also handles a lot more processes for faster AI and machine learning performance. But we might have to wait for WWDC in a few weeks to really start seeing those advantages with iPadOS 18. And Apple says that the reason why they had to put the M4 in here was because they had to build a whole new display engine to support the tandem OLED display. So maybe we might start seeing OLED on the Mac line when they also get this chip, at least I'm hoping so. The M4 also supports hardware accelerated ray tracing, so if you game a lot on your iPad, you'll start seeing much better graphics with more realistic shadows and reflections. Something else to note is that the performance of the M4 varies depending on which storage size you get. So the 256 and 512 gig models come with a 9-core CPU and 8 gigs of RAM, with the 1 and 2 terabyte versions getting a 10-core CPU and 16 gigs of RAM. There isn't a huge difference between the 9 and 10 core versions, at least from the tests that I've seen. The 10 core is maybe like, 10% faster, but with the RAM, you'll certainly see a more noticeable difference. Like in apps like Procreate, you'll be able to have more layers on your canvases, and just generally, you should see less Safari tabs in apps getting purged and needing a reload. Now, I am a big fan of the Magic Keyboard. It's great for productivity, and be a new version for the M4 iPad Pro with some very welcome changes. It now has this aluminium bottom casing, which makes the whole thing just feel a lot more premium and durable. It comes in space black or silver to match the iPad, both of which look really nice in person. I went for the black keys and that sort of slick, dark look. The trackpad is a lot larger. It feels way less cramped and a lot better to use with all of the multi-touch gestures in iPadOS. Plus, it now has haptic feedback like the MacBooks, and this has just made a huge difference. It just feels way nicer to use, and it is much quieter compared to the last one. It is way less clicky. Have a listen. So it'll draw less attention if you are working, somewhere quiet like a library. The other big change comes with the addition of a new row of function keys up top. And this is something that I've wanted on the Magic Keyboard for so long now. It's so useful having access to things like screen brightness, volume, playback controls, all down at the keyboard where your hands are. There's way less need to reach up to the display. One thing I will say though is it is missing buttons for adjusting the keyboard backlight brightness. But I don't think that we actually need like dedicated keys for that. So maybe instead Apple could add a shortcut by using the Control or Option key with the screen brightness buttons to get the same result. The hinge has also been redesigned. It's now more of an oblong oval shape. It still has the pass-through port, which now supports up to 40 watts of pass-through charging, almost twice as fast as before, which is great to see. But it is still power only, no data. But what's really impressive is even with all of those new features and the metal casing, it's somehow lighter than the last version, and when combined with the iPad Pro, it is now just a touch heavier than the MacBook Air, making them a lot more comparable in weight. It's just better in every way with the added features, and it makes it feel a lot more like a MacBook. And this is why I think Apple made the iPad Pro so thin, because making it thinner also makes it lighter, meaning that the iPad can sit further back on the new Magic Keyboard. You can really see the difference with them next to each other. The whole design revolves around trying to balance the iPad on this floating cantilever design. So making it lighter means we get more room for that extra row of keys and the larger trackpad for a better user experience. It really has just been fantastic. And if you use your iPad a lot in the setup, then the new Magic Keyboard alone could make it worth the upgrade, bearing in mind that this is only compatible with the new M4 iPad Pros. It is still prone to rolling back if you've got it on your lap or on a non-solid surface, so keep a wrist on it or a hand just to be safe. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it's any worse than the old version, which also did the same. We also have a new pencil, the Apple Pencil Pro, and this has some really cool upgrades. There's a new squeeze gesture, which brings up the pencil tools right by the tip on screen, so you're not having to move your arm so much when switching tools or colors, which can be a lot of moving if you've got the bigger screen iPad. You can also customize it in settings for more specific controls, or link it to a shortcut if you want to build something more complex. When squeezing it, it actually feels like you're pressing in on the pencil, even though it is solid. And that's because I added a new haptic engine on the other end, which does this crazy good job of simulating the sensation, the sort of reaction of squeezing it. It's very nicely done. It still has the hover feature, so you can see where on the canvas you're about to mark, but it also now has a gyroscope. So it can detect and react to you twisting and turning the pencil as you draw, giving you full control over the shape of each stroke. Now, I'm not much of an artist, but I can see this definitely being useful for people who are a lot better at drawing than me. Even if you just use the pencil for handwritten notes, it's an incredible feeling having that total control over how the ink writes onto the page. And then lastly, they've added Find My support, so if you lose it, you can find it again. It's not quite as precise as like AirTag tracking, but it's enough to get you in the right direction and getting close by. Great additions all round to the pencil. It's compatible with both the M4 Pro and the new M2 Air, along with the USB-C pencil. You can use that as well. But you can't use your old Apple Pencil 2 because they had to redesign the attachment magnets to fit around the new landscape camera and Face ID. From the big changes like the new OLED display, the insane performance potential from the M4 chip, to those smaller quality of life improvements like moving the front camera to landscape and adding shortcut keys and a larger trackpad to the Magic Keyboard, this generation fixes a lot of those little annoyances that I've had with the iPad Pro. When it comes to the hardware, I think that we've reached peak iPad. There really is just very little else I could want, maybe like a second Thunderbolt port, or maybe adding in an SD card slot so I don't need to carry an adapter. But when it comes to the software, to iPadOS, I do still feel like there is more to do to make this a more capable Pro computer. Just basic things like being able to have more than one audio source playing at a time, or being able to eject an external drive from the Files app to avoid corruption, the continued bugginess of Stage Manager, or just being able to export a project from Final Cut and not have to leave the app in full screen. These limitations they don't make sense to me on an iPad Pro with such an insanely powerful chip. And just to be clear, I don't think that sticking macOS on the iPad would necessarily be the right way to go, because that then comes with its own set of challenges. macOS, for one, is designed around mouse input. A lot of changes would need to be made to make it touch-friendly. I just want iPadOS to be better at these simple tasks. But if you already like iPadOS and it works for you in your workflow, and you just want the best display you can get with top performance that's going to last, then the M4 iPad Pro is in a class of its own. It's my favorite device for browsing, watching content, working on the go. I've been away a lot recently, and I wrote and planned this whole video on the iPad Pro while I was away. I just love the extra portability it gives me versus my big 16-inch MacBook Pro. If you already have the M2 or even the M1 iPad Pro, then there's probably not enough here for you to want to upgrade, unless you really want that new Magic Keyboard or the OLED display. Pricing for each capacity remains the same, although Apple have dropped the 128 gig model, so we have a higher starting price at $1,000 or pounds for the 11-inch and $1,300 for the 13-inch with 256 gigs. But then adding in the Magic Keyboard for $350, you could just get an M3 MacBook Air for a lot less without any of the same software compromises. Even bump up the specs a little and still be less than an iPad Pro. It's also worth mentioning that WWDC is just a couple of weeks away, where we will likely see iPadOS 18 announced. This iPad Pro launch kind of feels like maybe only half the story, so it'll be interesting to see what new features, what AI stuff Apple has been working on to take advantage of all the power of the M4 chip. So I'll definitely be revisiting this iPad Pro in another video down the line. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, that really helps the channel out. Let me know what you think of this new iPad Pro and if you're going to get one, and subscribe and hit the bell to see more tech videos from me. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.